Do you want to vet your intro, or am I just going to let me roll with it? I'm gonna say you're amazing.
Okay. Go for it.
Hello, welcome, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. This is the Study Success Blueprint. Welcome to the Study Success Blueprint with me, Matthew Mason. I have a distinguished guest with me today, Dr. Andrew Sauer. He is a cardiologist from St. Luke's, Kansas City Health System, associate professor of the University of Missouri in Kansas City, associate editor of the JCF, executive director of the Cardiometabolic Center Alliance, co-director of cardiovascular research at Mid-America Heart Institute. Do you sleep?
A lot of things going on there, yeah. They weren't all what I had in mind, but that's how life and career goes, is things change. So I've had a lot of different roles over the past 10 years, and this is where I am now, and it's exciting. So
Cool. Well, I appreciate you being here. Let's talk about clinical studies. I'm going to start out every one of these podcasts with two questions. So first of all, what is the exciting innovation that you see in your field today?
there's a bunch, honestly, and I'm involved in multiple clinical trial spaces. So there's the heart failure space, there's the device space, there's implementation, there's digital health, there's cardiometabolic, and I think they all have varying interests and draws that pulled me into them. I think we have an enormous opportunity to change the way we care for patients in general. And so one of the things I'm most excited about is innovation that allows us to sort of bring patient care to the patient's home. And I think that the opportunities to leverage technology, implantables, wearables, but also the opportunity to leverage management systems, and essentially taking virtual care, which I find strange when we say virtual care, because it really isn't virtual. It's just doing it through technologies. But there's a lot that's missing from the patient care toolbox when we just do the narrative through the video. So ultimately, I'm excited about the opportunities to get patients the care that they need in their home.
Mhm.
And I hope that we can continue to see investments into that space.
So on the other side, really excited
Mhm.
about these innovations. How would you describe the landscape of collaboration today?
It's a challenge. I mean, I think people recognize that you have to collaborate to find any success. Everything is done as a team. And so I've participated in a number of clinical trials in various capacities. Sometimes I'm the site PI, enrolling the study and finding patients for the study. And I've had some real high enrollment numbers in my career. I've also been involved in investigator initiated trials from the point of concepting the idea, even at the whiteboard, and drafting the protocol and getting it into a position where it's a multiple site global trial. And I think that having that perspective of kind of being in a variety of roles, what I've realized is that you absolutely have to have great teams to do anything well. So
Mhm.
I think collaboration is what everybody wants, but collaboration is actually quite challenged because there's a lot of red tape, there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of waste and inefficiency in how essentially the dollars are spent in research.
Yeah. And it's a challenge. You're one of the few people who've, in a very short space of time, gone from I'm new to the space, I'm trying to figure it out, to building programs.
Mhm.
If you think of starting out,
Mhm.
didn't know anything, didn't know anyone, how can you be successful in that space to be where you are today?
Yeah, I think at the core of who I am in my career, what I've always been sort of the consistent thread is a program builder. I like to build things, and I think I like to build things with people. And so when you look at early in my career, it was let's build a transplant program in a state that didn't have one. Sounds like a really straightforward, simple thing to say, but what I learned is that you have to grow up a lot in terms of your leadership skills. You have to have skills with public speaking, evangelizing, as we sometimes call this, going out there in the community and listening to people express what the opportunities are and their frustrations. And, that exactly was what worked.
Mhm.
And so A lot of those skills in program building, I've continued in as I've moved into more of a focus on research and innovation. And so I don't direct a transplant program anymore, but I feel like I am sort of running a business within a business. And it feels kind of gross for cardiologists when we say patient care is also a business. But the truth is, if you don't understand some of the economics of how things are done, then you're not going to have a very successful scholarly output in the end, which is what we're looking for, is to advance the science and understand the disease and treat the disease better. But something has to happen to pay those bills, right? And
Yeah.
so thinking about it like a business is something else that I picked up along the way.
Yeah. There are gross things in healthcare
Yeah.
that we have to participate in. How do you square that with your clinical role?
Yeah, I think you have to be able to keep an open mind about the reality that you can talk about how to help patients while also being responsible with the dollars.
Yeah.
You know, in program building, for example, we would frequently have discussions about when to add staff. You could have the same discussion with a research operation. When do you add staff? When do you add research coordinators? When do you add statisticians to your team? And, to what extent do you have them involved? And ultimately, you have to think about, it's not just about what's best for the patient, but it's also what's best for the team to maintain this viability.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's no one there to take care of the patient. So you can't just pound your fists and say to the administration, I need 3 more transplant coordinators tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't get it, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
Right? You have to be able to say, here's how we pay for those positions, and here's how we essentially run the business. So we have to be cognizant of what's coming in and what's going out. And when I'm appraising a study, for example, that we want to take on, we have to think a few steps ahead. It needs to be a study that we're not going to have to dip into reserves significantly to pay for the team to do the work. And so there is just, unfortunately, the priority list has to consider all those things. You can't just do, well, this is what we want to do because this is what we're interested in. And this is what the patient population looks like. You have to be responsible with the dollars that are going to go into that.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess bringing that together, thinking about it, being responsible with the dollars, thinking about trials you are interested in, trials you can afford. I speak to people who are building a program and want to be involved in research, want to be investigators, and they're fixated on the dollar amount they may bring in or the population that they may have. How do we square those things? How do you approach it? Is there a checklist that you go through in your head when you appraise a new sponsor?
for sure, I think that I always begin with what's the story I want to tell, right? So if I'm leading a research organization, essentially, which is what we're doing as clinical trialists. So what story are we trying to tell to the outside world that represent our values and our priorities in terms of the science that we're trying to help advance? So, for example, if we're going to focus on obesity phenotype and we want people to know that that's the space that we are moving toward, then of course we not only appraise, the different clinical trials that are in that space as to whether they fit that narrative, because there may be something down the road that you have to kind of vision that helps that story come along. And then there may be additional studies that come later. So the here and now, it has to be put in, an appropriate place to recognize that there's a larger context. And so beginning with what's the story is a really good, helpful way for me, at least, to frame that question.
Going back to your earlier point, you're speaking to people in the community when taking the philosophy for clinical trials. What is the one question that gets people to open their heart out and tell you what their pains and frustrations are trying to navigate this field? Because
there's a number of pain points that people will discuss. So even when you're just considering taking on the study, you have to do a feasibility assessment of, do we have these patients? So sometimes that basic question of, do we have these patients? What tools do you have to sort that out? So a lot of operations don't have very many sophisticated tools to do that. And so they don't really know how many patients they even have. And so they're sort of doomed to fail no matter what. And we know when we start up sites, if we start up, say, 60, 70 sites in the US, which is sort of what we're targeting, we know that a good 10 to 20 of them will enroll almost nobody. Part of it is that we don't have a very good system in clinical trials in general for sites to know what studies are most suited to them.
Mhm.
And we don't have a great system for CROs, research organizations, AROs, to identify sites that are best suited
Mm.
to be started up in their study. And I think that we have a long way to go to improving that gap.
Yeah. So if I sort of read that back, it's people don't have the tools to indicate what their performance may be, model that. And then there's a financial risk element.
Yeah.
Recently, congratulations, moving up to executive director of the Cardiometabolic Center Alliance. Does that involve educating other programs about how to balance these risks?
So CMCA, the Cardiometabolic Center Alliance, is actually, in many ways, it's in its infancy. Founded by my previous boss, Mikhail Kosoborod, and the original concept was to address the implementation gap.
Mhm.
Right? That's really where it's been focused predominantly. And we're talking about improving the performance of clinical care teams in addressing a lot of these gaps. We know that this is important for cardiokidney metabolic disease. And
Mhm.
so we basically build metrics into the sites that are oriented toward being centers of excellence. And we say, let's measure these things. And then as we measure these things, these metrics, we know that they will be performed better.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you manage what you measure.
Yep.
So that's the first principle. But then we also teach centers how to find those best practices that we all want to orient toward. And the next stage is really going to be about also having those sites be partners with us in a research organization where they could participate in clinical trials.
Mhm.
And so making some of these large sponsors will say, hey, we got this going on. There's 20 something sites that are working on implementation. They can also be great sites for your next cardiokidney metabolic therapy that you want to roll
Mhm.
out. So kind of bridging those gaps. And again, this is all the building that we're talking about.
Yeah. And we've spoken before about implementation science as not being a really richly discovered and researched area before.
It's not even well defined. I mean, it's a phrase or a word that's tossed around a lot.
Mhm.
I actually work to not say implementation science too much because there's always someone that says that's not implementation science, and I
I
say,
think I
okay,
heard it
fine.
from you, but
Yes. So, but I do talk a lot about implementation because I think that we can talk all day long about what that is,
Yeah.
and I work on a number of projects where we work to improve implementation of therapies that we know are best for patients.
Yeah.
We're talking about the basic class 1 recommended type things. And so we are doing that.
Mhm.
And with CMCA is we are developing best practices. We're teaching sites as they come on board with us how to measure their performance measures.
Mhm.
And then we teach each other as sites, how to do things better, maybe
Yep.
more efficiently.
Yep. Mhm.
And this is a model that the Implement HF initiative, which we partner with the American Heart Association for patients with heart failure, which is kind of a spin-off of the Get With the Guidelines initiative. Same principles, dashboards,
Mhm.
measure things, define your performance measurements, and then take the opportunity to model share
Mhm.
what are
Mhm.
the best practices that are working. This is the kind of work we're doing, but I think that the next wave of innovation that's going to be leveraged is to actually get into doing the trials where we
Yep.
are really at the razor's edge of we're not where we are, but where we're going.
You're actually saying CMCA is talking about existing guideline directed class 1 indicated stuff. Is it fair to say that's a research light, as in
For now.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, what is research, I guess, is the question. Right? So, but I think that anytime you're measuring things and then using that information to create data outputs that allow you to do something and act, and especially when we're trying to help our patients
Mhm.
as a medical research organization. But we have really only started the type of scholarly output that we'd like to see and the science that's being done at the same time.
Yeah, and I know I was pulling on that thread a little bit to
Mhm.
say when I'm thinking back 15 years ago, I'm starting again, research isn't anything different to than what we did in college.
Right.
Right? There's no real change, and if I'm implementing a change in my program through CMCA, there's no reason I shouldn't participate in research.
Right. There's nothing new about the scientific method that we all learned about in elementary school, right? We have a question, we develop a hypothesis, we then form a objective, we set out and carve out methods to study that question based on that hypothesis, and then we have a agnostic view about the data that comes from those methods. And that, to me, is what we're trying to do all the time within our clinical enterprise, within the research organization, which I'm fortunate to have a leadership role there, and also with CMCA, is we're just trying to apply the scientific method over and over again to questions that we think are really important to our patients that we need to answer.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be complicated. How do I improve the behavior in clinic where a clinician checks a UACR on a patient who has heart and kidney disease and has had 10 years of diabetes?
Yeah.
Because I know that if the clinician sees that number, that might change what we think are the best therapies for that patient. So it has important implications. It's a basic question. So how do we measure that? How do we sort of change the behaviors? How do we incentivize those behaviors? So those are the kind of things we're doing.
But it doesn't have to be scary, right? I always come back to this where there is so few clinical sites, hospitals participating in research, period. And then we wonder why, we can't recruit any patients for these studies. And there's a really small pool, and clinical studies, they become more complicated, right? It scares patients off, it scares physicians off, it scares coordinators off. How do you challenge that fear when I want to be part of research, I want to participate, I want to be part of CMCA, I want to contribute, but I think it's going to be too hard?
I think we have to try to overcome that biased assumption. For example, if we look to oncology, it's become pretty commonplace that if a loved one has the unfortunate diagnosis of breast cancer, my grandmother died of breast cancer, but if she was in a oncologist clinic today, first of all, she wouldn't be seeing some general oncologist. She'd be seeing a breast cancer oncologist that they pretty much only sees breast cancer. That's the way cancer has moved. It's become incredibly hyper-specialized. And for those patients that are seeing that oncologist, they're not going to get just the usual 1990s therapies, chemotherapy or whatever, and they're going to be offered a number of potential clinical trial-based therapies, and they may get placebo, for example. And that seems normal.
Yeah.
Why are we not making that pivot in cardiovascular, cardio-kidney metabolic? Because ultimately, if we could teach patients and clinicians that it's normal to not only offer FDA-approved, guideline-endorsed basic therapies, but we also should be offering patients access to what's next. Because we know some of those patients will do better and live longer and have better quality of life. So I think normalizing and telling patients that truth about clinical trials is that generally, even if you're in the placebo arm, you get a better outcome than if you're not in the trial at all. If you're taking care of patients as a cardiologist, you should be participating in clinical trials. It's just a question of which ones. And then turning the organization for research into a healthy, viable economic, model, I think is the trick. And it is intimidating, but you don't learn how to do it unless you step out and start doing it.
So you need to change that paradigm, change those thoughts. Are there barriers? Are there boundaries? You talked about red tape earlier. If I had to do one thing in the next year to advance clinical trials, what would that be for you?
Well, I'd love to have like a depot where trialists could have a better awareness of each other. So what I mean by that is I get a cold email probably every other day asking me to consider, signing a non-disclosure agreement so I can learn about a protocol, a potential clinical trial that maybe we could do at our center. And it's a study that there's zero value to that being done at my site with me as the PI. It's not part of our story. It's not part of our narrative. And I've experienced this on the other end when we're trying to select sites, for a large program. It's there's not a great science to picking sites.
Mhm.
It really is like, do you know this person? Do you know this person? So
Mhm. Mhm.
I think it's a major gap.
Yeah.
And we waste a lot of money and time
Mhm.
with this inefficiency.
Yeah.
And we need to develop some science in doing that better and
Mhm.
more efficiently. It also takes a long time to get trials started.
Yeah.
And so then we're sometimes in the situation where we finally get started and now the trial is almost over.
Yeah.
And now we can't hit our enrollment targets because the trial is done. Nobody had a great experience, except for maybe hopefully a few patients that got enrolled and had a
Mhm.
good outcome.
Yeah, and if I just drill into that a little bit more, I think the NDA is a great example
Mhm.
of time added to the process. I mean, we're scientists.
It's significant, right? So we don't even consider that part of startup
Yeah.
at my institution because it's not only cumbersome, but it's highly variable
Mhm.
and it can take 2 weeks.
Mhm.
That's uncommon, honestly. We're usually looking at a month minimum.
Yeah.
It can also take 6 months.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is so hard. I'm not a lawyer. I'm sure there's some really good reasons why these things have to go round and round. But I do think that it'd be great to figure out how to take that process and streamline it. Like,
But I guess the NDA is one thing in the whole entire process. We worked together on a clinical trial. I think we were on about 9 months from the time we went to the first site to
Mhm.
say, "Hey, you're interested," to the time we'd signed on the dotted line and was able to, start up,
Mhm.
right? And there's things that from a startup perspective, from a device manufacturer sponsors perspective, that you have to get in place. But a lot of it was going back and forward, and a lot of it was inefficiency and time. Isn't 9 months from idea to first patient in, is that acceptable?
I don't think it's acceptable, but it's common.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of programs struggle to do it faster than 6 months. And some of these more nimble community oriented sites, by the way, can go faster,
Mhm.
which is, most people think that's kind of ironic, but
Yeah.
the academic quagmire, I think, slows a lot of these big centers down and actually they could take longer.
Yeah.
Right. So this becomes a challenge. And so if you only focus on the same sites for every trial and they're already full and they
Mhm.
have no bandwidth
Mhm.
and they're burnt out,
Mhm.
well, this isn't a very good exercise. And then we're competing, tripping over ourselves. And so I think we really have to kind of rethink our systems because the startup takes forever. Finding the right sites takes a long time, identifying them. And then there's a lot of sites that turn out not to be great fits for
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
study. So enormous amount of work needs to be done on
Yeah.
making this more efficient.
So, this is a hypothetical question. We'll talk about the future in a second, but the community sites. I fully agree. I have great experience with community sites, super nimble. We're looking at 6-week turnaround, not 6 months, right? And if I'm doing a investigator initiated trial from an academic center, I'm one academic center, I've got a long process, right? Whereas I'm going to target 5 community hospitals. H- How would you think you should approach those community hospitals and coach them through the process and saying, do you know what, guys, you can actually do this. Like this is okay. What education tools, what support do you think is needed from the sponsor, from the investigators, from the global PI, from the country PI?
Yeah, I mean, they have to have the basics, right? You need some regulatory people there at every site that understands how to navigate the central IRB versus their local IRB. Obviously, you want to have people that know how to be nimble with contracting, but I think most hospitals and most community health systems actually have that in place.
Hmm. Hmm.
So really, if you have a interested champion,
Hmm.
that's really the catalyst, in my opinion, that really can take a site that you wouldn't expect to be high performing and turn them into a superstar.
Hmm.
You just have, when we got involved with Guide HF, for example, when I was at University of Kansas, we were not supposed to be a site. We had to really clamor and bang on the table and make a lot of noise to get attention to say, we should be considered a site. And when we finally met with them, they just said, well, why would we change our minds? And we just said, we'll enroll whatever number you need. We know we have the patients and we're very motivated.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and just knock this out of the park. And so we said we would, and we ultimately did. And I think that you really have to begin with a motivated champion. And so when you see someone raise their hand and say, jump up and down and say, I really want to be involved. And so, for example, CMCA has a lot of these community-oriented sites that also want to participate in clinical trials. And so as we start getting more involved with that, we want to look at these enthusiastic sites like in Lincoln, Nebraska, that doesn't do a ton of clinical trials, but they have the patients in spades. There are so many patients, and they say, bring it to us and we'll get this started a lot faster. And because, you only need the basics. You need a regulatory person, you need a contracting person, you need someone that understands how to read a budget and understand the implications. You obviously have to have the GCP certification for research. And so you need a PI and you need a research coordinator. I mean, it's really, you can do this with a really basic number of team members.
Yeah. A very lean team.
Very lean. But if they're excited and they're doing this together and they are thinking this is something fun that they can do as a team exercise and a program building venture for them, I mean, those sites can be just absolute gems.
Yeah. And who is that champion? Is it the PI at the site? I have a bias. I think it's the coordinator.
I think that, yes, it is the coordinator, but oftentimes the coordinator is being so enthusiastic because they have an aligned PI that supports them and protects them and gets them excited and says, this is going to be so much fun. We're going to be innovating this space, and answering this really important research question. And we have this great new therapy, for example, and we need to be out in front of this. People don't come to work to do the mundane. They come to work ultimately and get excited about coming to work because they're doing something that's fresh and pioneering. And that gets people to come to work and not just collect a paycheck. I mean, this whole quiet quitting thing is happening. The best way to counter the quiet quitting is give people a reason to care about their job, and this is a great way to get people excited, and I'm real proud of the fact that when we built teams in general, we try to get people who want to come to work. And then I try to get them excited about what we're doing. So we teach them like, this is the study, but what's going to come after this is this next generation thing. And then they're like, oh, so we're basically going to be the leaders. Yeah, that sounds great. It also finds its way into the pitch to the patients, because then the patients hear you say things like, we are not just doing best practices the right way and more consistently for patients, but we actually have access to the latest, greatest, newest thing. Yeah. Patients want that.
Yeah. And it's coming full circle, right? You're a builder. You like to be a builder. You have to tell a story. Is really those two things the keys to success? Build a team, tell a good story, and getting everyone believes in the story, coming along, you can take on the world.
I mean, think about the entrepreneurs that have done big things in all of human history. What they have in common is that they're builders. They understand that they need teams to get on the same page, but they craft a vision by telling a story. And Steve Jobs did that so well. How many times did he do that where he said, we're not making a phone. We're making a machine that's going to change how people essentially interface with each other, and getting them to be excited about the why, as we talk about. It's a very innate, primitive part of our psychology, and people get much more excited about the why. And so to do that, you have to be able to tell a story, and the story needs to make sense.
Yeah.
People get excited, people feel inspired, and then they want to come to work, and they'll work really, really hard because they're doing something that they really care about.
We all kind of work to be motivated and encouraged. If I needed to start, where would I start today? If I'm, first year appointed, I'm not at a center doing research already.
I think what you do is you pay attention to who are the voices in the space that are inspiring you. And so if I'm a young cardiologist that doesn't really know many people in clinical investigation, trying to get a lay of the land, pay attention to the ones that you find inspiring, and don't be afraid to just reach out. You and I met because you messaged me on LinkedIn or something, if I recall.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to stick yourself out there, be vulnerable. Yeah. And that's actually what brings people together, is vulnerability. It's the first step, is to say, I'm going to expose myself and be vulnerable and say, this person may ignore me, they may shoot me down, they may call me an idiot, but I'm going to go ahead and call up this person and
Mhm.
say, do you mind giving me some advice? It's highly flattering to people when you say, can I just have you explain to me how you became who you are?
Yeah.
It's just the simplest thing to do. Ask someone some questions,
Yeah.
get them to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
And then they may say, and I actually kind of want to help you out. So how do I make some connections for you?
Yeah.
And then the doors start opening.
Yeah.
Right. It just comes down to like wanting to do it and being willing to stick yourself out there and say, okay, how do I get involved?
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't look back at my career and say, this is how I designed it. I
Mhm.
didn't. I mean, I've wandered in a sense. It may actually look almost completely without direction, but I can also say that there's been a lot of habits that I've developed that have allowed me to have doors continue to open.
Mhm.
And that's something that I'm grateful that I learned early
Mhm.
is develop those habits and being vulnerable and just like you, reaching out
Mhm.
and building that network and then
Mhm.
say, how can I help you? How can you help me? And then we're doing something together.
Great. This is inspiring. I appreciate you to come on here. Now, we'll sort of leave it with this, which is, what are you most proud of the last 10 years? And what do you want to be proud of in 10 years' time?
I mean, I think what I want to be most proud, I'll answer the second question first, but I think what I want to be most proud of at the end of the day, I lived my life focused on the things that matter most, which is the relationships that are
Mhm.
most important. So, it sounds a bit cliche, but the truth is, I want to be able to be proud of the father I was
Mhm.
and maybe grandfather that I would hope to become. If my kids could say, you worked really hard, but you were able to put it down and be present with me when you
Mhm.
came home for dinner.
Mhm.
Like that basic thing is
Mhm.
something I really want to be able to
Mhm.
do. And I'd love to tell you that I could look back at the last 10 years and say, I'm proud that I've been that dad.
Yeah.
But the truth is I haven't.
Yeah.
But I am proud of the fact that I'm learning and
Yeah.
I'm willing to reposition that focus because coming to work is great, but I learned a long time ago, it is not about the pay,
Mhm.
but being willing to be bold and courageous and take risks and do things that other people have been afraid to do and kind of go where the wild, wild west is.
Yeah.
And that space needs leadership. And maybe I am that leader.
Mhm.
And I failed too,
Mhm.
and you're going to fall on your face sometimes and you're going to look back and say, I wish I would have handled that differently. And all you can say is let's learn and grow, you
Yeah.
know? And so learning is what I'm probably most proud of is that
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned how to grow and evolve.
Yeah. A great podcast I was listening to a few months ago with Simon Sinek, and it was interesting about the parallels between parenthood and leadership in a corporate position, and the vulnerability that you show to kids is also the same that you show to your team, which is, hey, I don't know the answer to this question, but I feel like it is the right thing. There is a brighter future. Let's go and do this together. It's a much more consultative way to interact with people. And that's how you act with your kids, and you learn, okay, that communication style didn't work. How do we improve it going forward? But
Absolutely. I think parenting has been one of the most instructive categories of my life. Children basically are like mirrors and they put up the mirror and they force you to look at the mirror. It's the mirror you can't turn away from. And they just show you how self-centered you can be and how egotistical and arrogant you can be.
yeah,
And they teach you, you don't have it figured out.
yeah,
And then if you apply those lessons in the workplace,
yeah.
I totally agree. I think that you're going to be a better leader, you're going to be a better follower, and we need to be both at different times.
Mhm.
And I think you're going to be willing to say, maybe I don't have to have such a hard line position on this because I'm learning that I can adapt. I'm
Yeah.
learning that I can give people compassion.
Mhm.
And I think that, it softens my edges.
Yeah.
For sure.
Cool. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Matthew.
We'll keep talking and
Hmm.
doing more trials, but
For sure. Good.
I would like to thank my wonderful guest, Dr. Andrew Sauer, for joining me today. If you like this podcast, please like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also listen back to our last episode where I was talking about my time at Akurey and one of the largest hemodynamic trials ever performed, as well as look forward to future episodes with insane researchers from Europe, and the United States. So with that, I can leave you today. Speak to you very soon. I've been Matthew Mace, and this is the Study Success Blueprint.